What happens when royalty meets late-night television and everything goes disastrously wrong? In just 34 seconds, a simple question about family would trigger the most explosive meltdown ever witnessed on live television, turning a friendly interview into an absolute nightmare that would end with security escorting a prince off the stage. Seth Meyer sat behind his desk that night, ready for what he thought would be another standard celebrity interview. The audience buzzed with excitement. Prince Harry walked out to thunderous applause, waving and smiling like he owned the place. He sat down, crossed his legs, and leaned back in the chair with an air of supreme confidence. Seth started with the usual pleasantries. "Welcome to the show. It's great to have you here." Harry nodded slowly, like he was doing Seth a favor just by being there. "Thanks for having me, I suppose." The audience laughed nervously. Seth pressed forward, determined to keep things light and fun. "So, you've been in New York for a few days now. How are you finding the city?" Harry shrugged. "It's loud, crowded. Not really my scene, to be honest. I prefer places with a bit more, shall we say, class." Seth smiled, trying to brush off the subtle dig at his home city. "Well, 8 million people seem to like it here." 8 million people also eat hot dogs from street carts, Harry shot back. Doesn't make it a good decision. The audience went quiet. Seth shifted in his seat, his smile becoming a bit more forced. "Okay, well, let's talk about your new project. You've been working on some interesting initiatives." Harry waved his hand dismissively. Yes, the charity work. Everyone always wants to talk about the charity work. It's quite tedious, actually." Seth blinked, genuinely surprised. "Tedious? You find helping people tedious?" "I find talking about it tedious," Harry corrected. "There's a difference, but I wouldn't expect you to understand the distinction." The host took a breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. This was his show, his stage, and he wasn't going to let a guest, royal or not, disrespect him or his audience. "I think I understand just fine," Seth said calmly. "Maybe we should move on to something else. Let's talk about your family." Harry's expression darkened immediately. "Let's not." "It's just a question," Seth continued. "Your family has been in the news quite a bit, and I thought—" "You thought wrong," Harry interrupted sharply. "You people in the media always think you have the right to ask whatever you want. You don't." Seth straightened up in his chair. The playful late-night host was gone now, replaced by someone who wasn't going to tolerate being spoken to like that on his own show. "With all due respect, you came on a talk show. Talking is kind of the whole point." Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With all due respect? Do you even know what that phrase means? Because I don't think you do." The audience was dead silent now. You could hear every breath, every uncomfortable shuffle in the seats. Seth's producers were probably screaming into his earpiece, but he kept his cool. "I know exactly what it means, and I'm showing you plenty of respect by having you here as my guest." "Your guest?" Harry leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let me tell you something about being a guest. A guest is someone invited into a home, treated with dignity, not interrogated like a common criminal." Seth's jaw tightened. "I asked you about your family. That's not an interrogation. That's a conversation." "A conversation requires 2 willing participants," Harry snapped. "Not a talk show host, desperate for ratings, and a member of the royal family who made the mistake of thinking American television had any standards." The audience gasped. This was crossing a line, and everyone in the room knew it. Seth put his cards down on the desk, a clear sign that he was done playing games. "You know what? I've had a lot of guests on this show. Actors, musicians, politicians, authors. Some are funny, some are serious, some are shy. But they all have one thing in common. They show up ready to have a good time and treat people with basic human decency." Harry smirked. "Are you finished?" No, I'm not, Seth continued, his voice steady but firm. You came on this show acting like you're doing everyone a favor. You insulted my city. You insulted my audience. You insulted me. And for what? Because you think a title makes you better than everyone else. I don't think it makes me better, Harry said coldly. I know it does. The audience erupted in boos. Real, genuine boos that echoed through the studio. Harry looked around, seemingly shocked that people would dare to react negatively to him. Seth stood up from his desk. That's it. We're done here. Harry stayed seated, his smirk widening. Excuse me? You're ending the interview? I'm ending your time on my stage, Seth replied. You can get up and walk out with some dignity, or I can have security help you. Your choice. You can't kick me off, Harry said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are, Seth said. You're someone who forgot that respect goes both ways. Title or no title, you don't get to treat people like garbage. Harry finally stood up, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. This is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. I've never been treated so poorly in my entire life. Maybe you should have been, Seth shot back. Maybe if someone had told you no before, you wouldn't be standing here making a fool of yourself on national television. I'm making a fool of myself? Harry's voice was rising now, losing all composure. You're a nobody. A late-night host who tells jokes written by other people. You're nothing. Seth didn't flinch. And yet, I'm the one still standing on this stage while you're about to be escorted out. Funny how that works. Harry pointed his finger at Seth, his hand shaking with rage. You'll regret this. Do you understand me? You'll regret this for the rest of your career. The only thing I regret is wasting 10 minutes of airtime on you, Seth said. Now, are you going to leave, or do we need security? For a moment, it looked like Harry might actually charge at Seth. His fists were clenched, his breathing heavy. The audience held its breath. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the meltdown. Harry took a step towards Seth, and that's when two security guards appeared from the wings. They didn't touch him yet, but their presence was clear. This was over. Don't you dare, Harry hissed at them. Don't you dare put your hands on me. Then walk, one of the guards said simply. Harry looked around the studio, at the audience staring at him with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. He looked at Seth, who stood there with his arms crossed, completely unbothered. He looked at the cameras, knowing that millions of people were watching this disaster unfold. You're all beneath me, Harry said, his voice shaking. Every single one of you. Then I'm sure you won't mind leaving, Seth replied calmly. The security guards moved closer, not touching, but clearly ready to, if needed. Harry straightened his jacket, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. I came here as a courtesy, he said, a courtesy to you and your pathetic little show. Courtesy received and rejected, Seth said. Goodbye. Harry turned and started walking toward the exit, but he couldn't help himself. He stopped and spun back around. You know what your problem is? He called out to Seth. You think you're clever. You think you're funny. But you're just another American who doesn't understand what real class looks like. Seth walked back to his desk and sat down, looking directly at the camera. Class isn't something you're born with. It's something you show through your actions. And right now, you're showing us exactly what you're made of. That was the final straw. Harry lunged forward, and the security guards immediately stepped in, each taking one of his arms. He struggled against them, shouting incoherently. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I'll have your jobs. I'll have all your jobs. The guards were professional, not rough, but not gentle either. They guided him firmly toward the exit while he continued to shout and struggle. This is assault! This is assault! You're all witnesses! The audience watched in stunned silence as a prince was literally dragged off a talk show stage, still screaming about his importance, and how everyone would pay for this humiliation. Seth just sat there, letting the moment speak for itself. As Harry's voice faded into the distance, still ranting and raving backstage, Seth turned to the camera with the most genuine smile he'd had all night. "Well," he said to the audience, and viewers at home, "that went well." The studio erupted in applause and laughter, the tension finally breaking. The band started playing, trying to restore some normalcy to the show. Seth continued, "We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have someone who actually knows how to have a conversation. Someone who treats people with respect. Someone who, and this is key, won't need to be physically removed from the building." More laughter and applause. The audience was with him completely now, united in their disbelief at what they'd just witnessed. "But seriously," Seth added, his tone becoming more genuine, "I want to apologize to everyone who tuned in expecting a normal interview. That was not normal. That was not okay. And we don't tolerate that kind of behavior here, regardless of who you are or where you come from." The applause grew louder. Seth had turned a disaster into a moment of principle, standing up not just for himself, but for basic human decency. As they cut to commercial, you could still hear commotion backstage. Harry's voice, distant but unmistakable, still complaining, still demanding apologies, still utterly convinced that he was the victim in all of this. The crew members looked at each other in disbelief. In all their years working in television, they'd never seen anything like it. A guest completely self-destructing, burning every bridge, and getting thrown off the show, all because he couldn't handle being treated like everyone else. When the show came back from commercial, Seth was composed and professional. He welcomed his next guest with genuine warmth, and the interview went smoothly, proving that the problem wasn't the show or the format or the questions. The problem had been one person who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Throughout the rest of the show, Seth made a few light jokes about what had happened, but he never dwelled on it. He didn't need to. Everyone had seen it. Everyone knew what had gone down. And everyone understood that sometimes, no matter how famous or important someone thinks they still need to be held accountable for their behavior. The band played them out at the end of the night, and as the credits rolled, the camera caught Seth shaking his head with a small smile, still processing the absolute chaos that had unfolded on his stage. Backstage, Harry was reportedly still arguing with anyone who would listen, insisting that he had been disrespected, that he deserved better treatment, that this would have consequences. But in that studio, on that stage, Seth Meyers had drawn a line. And when someone crossed it, he didn't care about titles or status or potential backlash. He cared about treating people right and expecting the same in return. It started as a simple interview, the kind that happens every night on talk shows across the country. A host, a guest, some questions, some laughs, and everyone goes home happy. But in 34 seconds, one question about family had triggered an avalanche of arrogance and entitlement that exposed who someone really was when they didn't get their way. The moment Harry had said, "You people in the media always think you have the right to ask whatever you want," everything had shifted. That's when Seth realized this wasn't going to be a normal interview. That's when the audience sensed something was wrong. And that's when the collision course toward disaster became inevitable. Because here's the thing about talk shows. They're built on a simple agreement. The host asks questions, the guest answers them, and everyone tries to make it entertaining. It's not complicated, but it requires both people to participate in good faith. And when one person decides the rules don't apply to them, when one person decides they're too important to be asked basic questions, the whole thing falls apart. Seth had tried to save it. He'd tried to redirect, to find common ground, to keep things moving. But Harry wasn't interested in being saved. He was interested in being worshipped. And when he didn't get that, when he was treated like just another guest instead of royalty, he couldn't handle it. The insults had come fast after that. The dig about ratings, The suggestion that American television had no standards. The claim that everyone in the room was beneath him. Each comment had been worse than the last, each one revealing more about Harry's true attitude toward the people around him. And Seth had taken it. He'd absorbed the insults, maintained his composure, and tried to keep the show moving. Right up until Harry had said, "I don't think it makes me better. I know it does." That was the line. That was the moment when Seth stood up and said enough. Because you can insult a host, you can insult a show, you can even insult a city. But when you insult an entire audience to their faces, when you tell a room full of people that you're inherently better than them because of who your family is, you've crossed into territory that can't be ignored. The image of Harry being escorted out by security, still ranting about his importance, still threatening consequences, still completely unable to see how badly he'd embarrassed himself. That image captured everything. It showed what happens when entitlement meets accountability. It showed what happens when someone who's never been told no finally hears the word. Seth hadn't been cruel about it. He hadn't mocked or taunted or gloated. He'd simply been firm. He'd set a boundary and enforced it. And in doing so, he'd shown that real class, the kind Harry claimed to value so much, isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about how you treat people when you don't have to treat them well. The audience had understood that immediately. That's why they'd cheered when Seth stood his ground. That's why they'd booed when Harry had declared himself superior. They weren't there to see someone bow and scrape before royalty. They were there to be entertained, to laugh, to enjoy themselves. And Harry had ruined that with his attitude. Every talk show host dreads the bad guest, the person who won't play along, who makes everything difficult, who sucks the energy out of the room. But most bad guests are just awkward or boring. They don't actively antagonize the host and audience. They don't pick fights on live television. They don't have to be physically removed from the building. Harry had managed to do all of that in the span of one interview. He'd turned what should have been easy publicity into a complete catastrophe. And the worst part? He still didn't seem to understand why. Even as security was escorting him out, he was convinced he was the wronged party. That disconnect, that inability to see how his own behavior had caused the situation, made the whole thing even more dramatic. Because this wasn't someone having a bad day or losing their temper in a moment of stress. This was someone whose entire worldview was so warped by privilege that they genuinely believed they could say and do whatever they wanted without consequences. Seth's response had been perfect because it was proportional. He didn't overreact. He didn't get into a screaming match. He simply said, "This is my show. These are my rules. And if you can't follow them, you need to leave." It was the kind of boundary setting that everyone wishes they could do in their own lives when faced with unreasonable people. The fact that it happened on television, in front of millions of viewers, with cameras catching every expression and every word, made it unforgettable. This wasn't a story someone would tell later, claiming it happened. This was documented. This was real. This was a prince getting kicked off a talk show because he couldn't behave like a decent human being for 20 minutes. In those final moments, as Harry was being led away, still shouting about assault and consequences, you could see everything you needed to know about both men. Seth, calm and composed at his desk, ready to move on with his show. Harry, flailing and screaming, unable to accept what had just happened to him. One man had power because people respected him. The other had a title because he was born into it. And when those two things collided, when earned authority met inherited privilege, there was only ever going to be one outcome. The guards had been professional the entire time, never using more force than necessary, never losing their cool even as Harry accused them of assault and threatened their jobs. They knew their role. They knew what needed to happen, and they did it efficiently and effectively. Seth's final comment before the commercial break, his promise to bring out someone who knew how to have a conversation, someone who treated people with respect, had been the perfect punctuation on the disaster. It reminded everyone what the baseline expectation was. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't asking too much. Just be decent. The rest of the show had gone smoothly because everyone else understood that basic concept. They came ready to engage, to be interesting, to give the audience something worth watching. They didn't need to be begged or managed or eventually ejected. They just did what guests are supposed to do. And that contrast made Harry's behavior even worse in retrospect, because it proved that the problem wasn't the show, the host, the questions, or the format. The problem was one person who thought he was above it all. One person who believed his birthright exempted him from basic courtesy. One person who learned, in the most public way possible, that it doesn't work like that. Not here. Not on this stage. The moment would live forever in television history. People would watch and re-watch it, dissecting every word, every expression, every escalation. They'd debate whether Seth had handled it right, whether he should have cut to commercials sooner, whether he should have tried harder to salvage the interview. But in the room that night, in that moment, there was no debate. Everyone knew what they were witnessing. A spectacular meltdown, a complete disaster, and a host who refused to let someone trash his show, his crew, and his audience just because they had a fancy title. Seth Meyer had invited a prince onto his show expecting a normal interview. What he got instead was a masterclass in how quickly things can go wrong when someone refuses to show basic respect. And his response, standing up and calling it out instead of letting it slide, became the defining moment of the night. Because that's what made it so compelling. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was real human conflict playing out in real time, with real consequences. And when it was over, when Harry was gone and the show continued, everyone watching knew they'd witnessed something they'd never forget. The band played Harry out to the desk with the same upbeat music they played for every guest. He'd soaked it all in, waving with that practiced royal wave. Seth had stood up to greet him, extending his hand for a handshake. Harry had taken it, but the grip was limp, perfunctory. Harry's arrogance had been there from the start. When Seth mentioned being busy, Harry had replied, "Yes, well, one must make appearances from time to time." Not appreciation, just obligation. When asked about press tours, Harry said, "Everyone thinks they're entitled to your time. It's quite draining." The hot dog comment had been particularly telling. It wasn't just a joke. It was Harry's way of saying, the everyday things normal people enjoy were beneath someone of his stature. The audience had picked up on that immediately. Seth's question about family had been standard, but Harry had treated it like an invasion of privacy. "Let's not," he'd said with such finality and condescension. That was the first real crack in Seth's professional facade. The "with all due respect" exchange exposed how little respect Harry actually had for anyone in that room. He'd used the phrase to mock Seth, to question his intelligence. Seth's response, pointing out that having Harry as a guest was itself a form of respect, had been perfect. But Harry couldn't see that. His worldview didn't allow for the possibility that he wasn't the most important person in every room. The ratings comment, the suggestion that Seth was desperate, and that American television had no standards, came with layer after layer of contempt. The audience's gasp had been genuine shock. That should have been Harry's wake-up call, but he doubled down, enjoying their shock, feeding off it. Seth's speech about guests who share basic human decency had been devastating because it was so measured. He wasn't screaming or calling Harry names, and the fact that Harry couldn't meet that incredibly low bar was damning. I don't think it makes me better. I know it does. Those words sealed Harry's fate. It wasn't a joke, it was genuine belief. He actually thought being born into a particular family made him inherently superior. The boos that followed were every person who'd ever been looked down on finally expressing how they felt. Seth standing up was powerful because it was so simple. He just stood, said the interview was over, and meant it. Harry's shock was almost comical, like it was incomprehensible that there could be consequences. Harry's attempt to pull rank was pathetic. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Yes, everyone knew. That was the point. Seth's response cut to the heart of it. "You're someone who forgot that respect goes both ways." When Harry called Seth a nobody, it was a desperate attempt to regain superiority. But it didn't work. Seth had the room, the audience, the moral high ground. All Harry had was a title and a failing argument. The threat, "You'll regret this," was empty. The threat revealed Harry's impotence more than his power. Real power doesn't need to make threats. When Harry stepped toward Seth, security appeared instantly. Harry's command not to touch him showed how disconnected he was from reality. These weren't his servants. They answered to the show, to Seth, to everyone's safety. Seth's return to his desk, his casual, "Well, that went well," was the perfect release of tension. The applause wasn't just for Seth. It was for accountability, for rejection of unearned superiority, for everyone who'd ever wanted to stand up to someone like Harry. Through it all, Seth maintained his composure, firm without cruelty, direct without pettiness. He showed everyone how to handle an impossible situation with grace and strength. The 34 seconds from that first family question to the moment everything fell apart was a masterclass in how quickly respect can erode when it's not mutual. Harry had walked in thinking his title would shield him from consequences. He'd been wrong, and the world got to watch him learn that lesson. Seth represented something universal. The person who stands up, the person who says no, the person who refuses to be diminished or disrespected, regardless of who's doing it.